History textbooks leave out the strange, practical details that make the past feel real. In this compilation, a small state is cast as a giant economic idea, and 7 more stories show how institutions, cities, and ordinary objects shaped history in unexpected ways. Singapore entered Malaysia as the tiniest state, yet it held the biggest crowd. On the map, that looked almost backwards. On September 16, 1963, Singapore became a state inside Malaysia. It was only 581.5 square kilometers, but about 1.82 million people lived there. That mix mattered. A small land area with a huge population pointed toward ports, trade, and dense urban growth. So the New York comparison made sense as a metaphor. It cast Singapore as the Federation's big city engine, not a quiet backwater. Before and after merger, the same island carried a city-state weight inside a larger country. A paper map could show why the little node drew such attention. The court that sent Calvin Duncan to prison later hired him as clerk. That is not a metaphor. He had been convicted of murder and given life in prison. Duncan's first role in this story was not public office. It was prison, after a murder conviction that put him inside the system he would later enter from the outside. The turn came through an election. He was later elected clerk of the same court, moving from a prison cell to an office tied to its records. That created a rare reversal inside one institution. The same court that once held his conviction now placed him at the desk that tracks cases, filings, and dates. So his story moves from a life sentence to a public office in the same building. The final image is not a cell door, but a ledger on a clerk's table. A quart of frozen salad sat on a 1930s price tag for $1. That was not a normal lunch item. In that decade, home freezers were not common in American kitchens. Packaged frozen food was still a new way to sell a cold meal. So the dollar price made sense as a novelty. A quart of frozen salad was a specialty purchase, not an everyday staple. Shoppers were paying for convenience, surprise, and the novelty of cold food in a box. Stores were testing how far packaged frozen goods could go. A single carton could feel futuristic beside a cash register and a paper bag. In the 1930s, that frozen salad was a small experiment on a cold shelf. At Hagemeister Park, some Packers fans watched from parked cars beside the field. No grandstands, just engines, windows, and a football game. This was the Packers' first stadium. Early pro football venues were still improvised, with little more than a field and open space around it. So fans used whatever worked. Some lined the edge of the field, while others stayed in their cars and watched from the sidelines. That made the game feel part stadium, part parking lot. The crowd fit around the action instead of into fixed seats. At Hagemeister Park, the Packers played in a space shaped by cars, grass, and open edges. A row of vehicles sat beside the field. Billy Gallagher's Times Square cabaret stayed open from sundown to dawn. One lit doorway held the street all night. Times Square was already a major New York nightlife district. After dark, people came and went for very different reasons. The cabaret did not serve one class of guest. It drew reputable patrons and others who simply needed a place to be after dark. That long window, sundown to dawn, matched the city's own rhythm. The room could catch late arrivals, night workers, and the last people still moving. So Billy Gallagher's place was less a fixed crowd than a night landing spot. By dawn, the doorway still glowed over the sidewalk. In Al Qunayh, a village in Jordan, the ground may hide a Roman sanctuary. The odd part is how ordinary the place looks above it. Al Qunayh is not a monument site. It is a living village, and archaeology links it to an older sacred landscape beneath later settlement. The clue is the Roman-era sanctuary, thought to have stood there before the village spread. Later homes and paths can sit over earlier worship space. That creates a layered site, where settlement did not erase the past completely. It covered it, leaving older stone under daily life. So the village edge becomes a quiet boundary between present homes and Roman stone. In Al Qunayh, the sanctuary is part of the ground itself. After the 1871 Lai earthquake, Kamapupupa blamed a foreigner riding a horse. That detail sounds almost impossible today. Kamapupupa was the mistress of King Kamehameha V. In that world, a sudden quake needed a human story people could point to. So the shaking was tied to a rider on a horse, not to rock and fault. The foreigner became the explanation people could picture on a road. That kind of explanation turned a natural event into a social one. The quake was no longer only ground movement, it had a face and a place. For people on Lanai, that meant the earthquake could be spoken about through a rider, a horse, and a roadside moment. The story stays with the road. A famous line gets pinned to Antonin Scalia, but the record does not back it up. The claim says everybody has a right to use the English language. Scalia was a United States Supreme Court justice, so anything attached to his name carries weight. That makes attribution matter, especially when a quote sounds polished and memorable. The key point is simple: he did not endorse that statement. A quotation mark can travel farther than the source and still leave the record behind. Once a line is repeated, it can sound official before anyone checks the source. The correction turns a bold claim into a question about where it came from. So the real story is not the sentence itself, but the attribution attached to it. On the page, a quotation mark sits beside the court opinion. That's the kind of history worth keeping: specific, surprising, and grounded in real people and places. If you want more overlooked facts like these, subscribe and tell us which story changed the way you see the past.